Hello, colleagues. Very good morning to Europe. Very good afternoon to Korea and Asia. Let us get started. Not all the members are present now. I see Professor Lee Jae-sung, Yoon Sung-hwan, and Anna is there, and Mireya. And also I have seen the screen of Charles, but he's not shown in face. And I don't know where the other colleagues are from Germany. Mireya, Sebastian, what about Sebastian?
Sebastian is joining. Can you hear me well?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Sebastian is joining, but he's actually having troubles to get in the webinar for some reason.
Right.
So he's already 20 minutes tested, but should be coming.
Good. And there are two Korean colleagues to participate in this workshop, but they may be busy or they may participate, come in a little bit later. And also we have Dr. Yerle Hee from Singapore, but she's probably unable to attend this workshop. What about the two colleagues from Poland? Professor Yoon?
Pavel is in Tanzania right now. Because he won't be able to make it today, but Thomas is going to participate for around 4 minutes.
Okay, Thomas is coming in.
Yes.
And we see also Professor Jung Se-won from Busan. He's present now. And I think we can start right away. Sebastian, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good
yes,
morning.
I did a couple of restarts, but it's working now.
All right. Today we have to discuss some papers in 3 sessions. And in addition to it, we have a couple of issues to deal with and to make a decision. Probably we can have start about the discussion of papers now. When the authors are available, we can rearrange the order of discussion. The first paper in the program is by Anna and Sebastian. So should we start the discussion about the paper?
Yes,
so
yes,
you
sure.
had some very big progress of the paper, right?
Yes, yes. Well, good morning again, everybody. Well, a big progress. I wouldn't frame it that way. No, I mean, you know what we presented last time, and since then, international developments have, as we all know, have continued to change dramatically. So the pandemic, and now we have the Ukraine. We have since the 24th of February, we have this war of aggression in Ukraine, and the implications for our overall topic that we deal with, that is connectivity, I think are really grave. And that is something that obviously is also relevant, or that is very important for the paper, for the chapter that Anna and I are co-authoring here. So for us, so in one way, I mean, we discussed that we need to bring in these latest developments in the international system, because at least from a European perspective, this is really, I mean, I think it's a paradigm shift. I mean, seriously, and I mean, developments are continuing. We all know that. I mean, since yesterday, this week there will be more discussion of new sanctions and so on. So what we are actually dealing here with is it's talking connectivity is not so much about increasing it, but to decide where it should be continued and where it should be discontinued. And so this is something that we want to bring into the paper as well. And unfortunately for us, we couldn't, I mean, we can't meet in person, because I really think that it would be very good for us to do that, but we cannot. However, we do have the opportunity to meet in June. But then again, that is still 2 months ahead, more than that. So there is not the time to wait. Well, I mean, so what we will do is we will draft, we will write the paper taking in these changes and what they mean for our overall topic. But I also hope that we will be able to discuss it in person when we meet in Brussels. So this is essentially it. And obviously we could go into discussing and need to discuss what the implications actually are. I mean, obviously we don't want to discuss the Ukraine war, no. But I think that, for instance, I mean, the implications for EU-Asia relations are grave. I mean, we are speaking of the role of China. In the end, this is, I mean, China is I call it the big elephant in the room. And so for us, I think we need to deal with this, because after all, if we meet people in Brussels, policymakers, and discuss our findings, they will be outdated if we do not bring in and reflect upon the implications of what is happening because of Putin's war.
Yeah, I understand the very critical issue now is how much of this Ukrainian crisis should be included in the paper, right? Of course, we can include the crisis into the paper, but how much and in what context? Because this is not the central issue, but it's kind of background issue, environmental changes that we have to deal with. Anna, do you have some idea?
Yes, I do have some ideas. Actually, I think it's not, I mean, the paper and the project is not about the Ukraine war. I mean, we all know that. But at the same time, what has happened in Ukraine and Russia's invasion in Ukraine is a fundamental wake-up point for the EU and for the European member states and Europe in general. I mean, it will really change the way in which the EU, you know, its role in the world, basically, and it will have implications on the EU's relations to Asia. China is obvious. It's becoming a really, really difficult relationship, I think, and trust, if there still was some trust between the EU and China, it's eroding very, very fast. So, but for other, you know, states in Asia, it also has implications. So that's one thing. I mean, that's new political international system we're living in. And for that reason, I think we must draw the conclusions, what that means for connectivity. And connectivity as a policy paradigm is also shifting, because when the whole international system is shifting towards geopolitics, connectivity is also becoming a tool of statecraft, not just let's say an economic, financial, technical, or anything else sort of functional policy. And that is somehow what our paper must define and discuss. So before Sebastian and I talked a little bit, and we talked about, connectivity, yes, but now we can have bad connectivity, sort of malign connectivity and benign connectivity. And what should the EU do, and what should other Asian, states do about this? How should we approach connectivity? Because quite frankly, we're going towards a situation where cooperation among certain states is almost impossible. We see that with the sanctions to Russia. We actually sort of breaking off economic globalization, at least. And I think there is a case to be done, to be said, and a case to be made, saying that we need to find other venues for cooperation, other dimensions of cooperation, because it's not good for the world that, that we're basically, dividing it up into different spheres. So I think that the paper has to go in that direction. So, yeah, and that will have a very strong sort of connection to the whole project. I think it's made the project much more politically relevant, I think, in many ways.
Do you think many of the papers we are writing should also include these context, or just a few papers? For instance, your paper, and if we deal with the economic side of the connectivity, then we have also China, right? We have so what should we do with this? This is a really very big challenge for us. Let us think about that, number one. Number two is, in the June conference, we will discuss the program a little bit in more detail after we have discussed our papers. What do you think, Anna and Sebastian? Do you like to present this paper in the June conference?
Well, if it's this paper, I mean, what we will present in the June conference, however, the format of the conference, it would be good to elaborate more what we are actually expected to deliver. I think the conference should be about, well, I mean, what we would present is on the one hand, obviously what we state in the paper, but at the same time the implications of that. So I'm not sure whether this is about presenting a fully fledged paper, but it's more a kind of workshop in which we throw out ideas, or let's say, certain statements and claims, and discuss them. Right. I mean, what is expected from us when we touch down in Brussels?
Yeah, just 1 hour ago or so, I sent you an email with the draft program for the international conference. And I have, in addition to the formal sessions, at the end of the conference, I have arranged one wrap-up discussion session, inviting 2 political scientists and Anna, I included Anna into the panel of RevOp session. And Werner Pasha, economist, is invited to participate as a panelist in the RevOp session as well. And one Korean political scientist, as well as one political scientist from UK, from the UK, Julie Gilson, I invited. Whether we have to deal with this more seriously in this RevOp session or in the formal paper sessions, that is one question. And also in the RevOp session, we can invite a few more participants. For instance, Sebastian can be on board as well to have some more elaborations about the Russia, China, and the especially Ukraine issue. But let us have discussion about it later, right? Okay.
Okay, but we will go through the Brussels agenda again. Yeah, I mean, I haven't yet looked at this in detail, so actually I haven't looked at it yet. So we would have to.
Yes, so we will have a discussion about that later. Later today. Okay.
Yeah.
So could I also reply to your answer? I mean,
yes.
Whether or not all the papers should be revised and so on. I'm not sure that the papers need to be, I mean, revised, but that's normal. But I don't think they need to be fundamentally reworked, because I think we have this framework. I mean, the shift in the international system, we're going towards geopolitics. I think all papers have that already, or I think, because that you know, we have to work in that. We have to work in the sort of setting we actually find ourselves. So that is not a fundamental shift. It's just that we need to update the papers, you know, to the extent relevant for each paper.
Yeah, each researcher can decide how much, in what direction, in what context they can include the Russia's invasion into Ukraine in their papers, right?
But again, I don't think it's the war we should talk about in the papers. I think it's the implications of what's happening on a much grander scale, because that is important.
Right. I fully understand, and I'm in full agreement with you. Yes. The
in a way,
of this, yes.
Yes. Well, in a way, I mean, what is happening is we are seeing a further acceleration of processes that have already started earlier, because of the war, right? That is the need for, I mean, the impact on global supply chains, the need to decrease dependencies and so on. So yes, it's in that sense it's an update. Yeah.
Right.
But it's a fundamental update, because now we are more aware we have more empirical data that show how grave, let's say how compromised earlier thinking in terms of connectivity have become, because we are talking about the need to qualify connectivity in terms of security. I think this is the key here, that security has become the major criterion on which to base any decision whether connectivity is to be established or strengthened, or maybe even cut.
Yes, this is a challenge for us all. Okay. So how do you expect the paper, I mean, to be done within 2 months until the end of until the international conference in Brussels, or what do you think about that? Can you have communication, online communication, and then develop papers until the conference? Or
Whom are you talking to now? Are you asking me? Anna
yes,
and
Sebastian and
okay,
Anna,
because
yeah.
you said papers, that's why.
Mm.
Well, yes, we will work on it, but to have, I mean, to have a final version that can be sent to a publisher or whatever, that is not that I think is not feasible, right?
So then we have to have a discussion about in what format and in which way we would like to have this event in June, right? In the process, should it be kind of academic conference presenting papers, or kind of workshop like discussion on the issues? That is what we have to discuss and decide. I thought we can present papers, what we have, I mean, after we have completed the writing. Probably we have 2 papers. One paper for the special issue, nearly done, right? And the paper to be developed for the monograph, it is still in progress. So what should we bring to this process conference? That is what we have to decide. And that is what I have also mentioned in my email to you all, because in the program, if you see the program draft, you see 2 papers two paper titles for each presenter, A and B. So option A is the previous paper, and option B, the current paper. So we have to make a decision on that, which paper or in which format we would like to have our conference in June, and then which paper we should discuss. That is my suggestion. Right. But the duration of the whole project is until the end of August this year. We did not submit application for extending, so that we have what we have to do is to complete the paper writing by that time. And what I have suggested to us in the very early stage of the project was to pay attention to these 2 outputs, one special issue, another monograph. Probably, I do hope that because of the COVID-19, we have some excuse to have not very smooth operation of the project, so that completing the writing by the end of August may be the last thing what we can offer to the EACEA. But extending that is not very desirable. That is what I want to note in advance. Yeah. Do you have anything else to add to your paper, Anna and Sebastian?
Well, I mean, obviously, as Anna has also mentioned, this all has a big impact on the EU's role as well.
Mm.
Right? So that is something that in the framework of EU-Asia relations, right? So that is something that, yeah. And it's not about, obviously, this is not about Ukraine. No, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
There is a Charles, I think, has raised his hand.
Yeah, I
Charles.
so thank you for the presentation and thoughtful remarks. Just to answer the question about what role Ukraine, I mean, I kind of agree with what Anna and Sebastian said, that this is not an analysis of the Ukraine situation, but I think we have to put the connectivity, and I think this is the framing chapter and all the chapters, and it can be more or less to an extent within the changing geopolitical context. And I think obviously you're going to see a battle for increasing connectivity between some partners, but we also see this divergent trend of decoupling and reshoring. And obviously, I mean, I was watching the press conference on Friday with Charles Michael and von der Leyen, and it was pretty clear to me that didn't go very well, is what I would say, is that they're not on the same page about what they view the international order to work. So I think this idea that we have these almost competing systems should be at least taken in as, if not a background factor, a very important contextual factor. And I agree with Sebastian and Anna that maybe takes a little time to incorporate into their thinking. But I don't think it's I mean, our book and the chapters are still about connectivity, but this within this new context. And I think that's important. So thanks. A challenge, but I think we can do it.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. So as I mentioned, the deadline for the completion of the paper is end of August. I'm sorry for mentioning that, but we cannot avoid it. And the second paper we have in hand is policy paper, Powell and Thomas. Powell is now in Tanzania. He's on leave to have some research. And Thomas is not yet present. So let's do that paper when Thomas is coming in. And the next paper is Mireya's paper. And Mireya's paper dealing with China, the EU, and digital connectivity, and about the global data governance. You have quite a big progress now, Mireya. Can you have some report on it?
Well, good morning. Yes, instead of presenting, because it's already quite advanced and last time I already present more. However, I want to follow with the previous commenters because I finalized the interviews and also interviews to EU officials, particularly in the European delegation in China and also in Brussels. So they went also in the same line when it comes to the geopoliticals of the shift in the cooperation between both actors. And also in digital affairs, particularly in data governance, there is what they call closed doors, right? So it's very difficult to cooperate. Yet it's not because Ukraine war, but it already started with sanctions, with human rights sanctions, and all the escalation in the bilateral relations, which is obviously impacting digital affairs and particularly data governance. However, what it highlights, for example, now is the cyber security aspects, for example, with Ukraine crisis once more. And what I want to highlight for this paper, because it's already not finished though, needs to be polished, but from the findings, what I would like to highlight in the particular scenario of digital affairs and data governance is the following. First of all, in the bilateral relation between or with EU-China, bilateral affairs are not priority, even less data-related issues, despite the importance of the sectoral policy. They are not priority, or they are not discussing in the agenda because the political situation. So in this paper, actually, even if the bulk of the core is analyzing and assessing the political and legal framework, the findings at the end is, it is hard, it's very complicated to have cooperation, and they don't even call it cooperation, they call it exchange. What is that? So that's, I think that's also relevant. I don't know if it happened in other sectors, but it's at least I find it relevant because we are talking in domestic nuances about digital strategy, digital priority, digitalization, at least at the EU level. But then when it comes to a global digital initiative, it's less present. The other thing is, as a finding, is they are focusing, as Charles had mentioned, with other partners for cooperation or trying to develop strategies. So this is something also to rethink about it. In terms of, let's say, data governance, very particular, because it's very technical. So then we have the dichotomy of high-level meetings, which are mainly inexistent, and then we have the technical level. And at the technical level, they're happening. So this is happening. They mention, or the interview is mentioned. And then in this particular monograph, what we see is the contrast between policymakers and the practitioners. So at the practitioner, at bottom, at top, the experts or the findings show the need of working not just at domestic level, but international level.
Mm-hmm.
Can I follow up here? Yeah, because
Yes, Sebastian.
yeah. Well, I think that I mean, this is an example how this area of data governance is a very good case study of how in the field of technology, technology-related fields, global governance efforts are increasingly compromised. And I think that we should at least, I mean, make it very clear that in the wake of the not only the pandemic, but then the war in Ukraine again, and China's apparent, well, and China's behavior in this context, that governance and global governance and governance in EU-Asia, in the EU-Asia context becomes very, very difficult. So this will be a case study for that. And that is related then back to what we discussed earlier. So I think that here we are able to provide the kind of update quite easily. Yeah. It was already observable even before, but now it's becoming more and more apparent. And yeah, I mean, when we talk again, when we will discuss things in Brussels, yeah, I mean, Charles referred to the last Friday's summit. I mean, talking governance, talking global governance is getting increasingly unrealistic.
That I fully agree to you. Yes. Clashing systems.
I mean,
so that governance becomes very difficult.
And this is this paper allows to really analyze the reasons for it.
Okay, I think this paper is pretty well developed now, and if we add some aspects of this conflicts and the implications of it, probably that's going to be a very important article. The next paper we would like to have discussion on is the Kiev fellows paper. Dong-hee Jo, Dr. Jo, wanted to report on the EU-Korea FTA, but the two colleagues from KIEP, Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, because just we had 2 weeks ago, we had the presidential election, and KIEP is a government-funded think tank, and they have to now report to the president-elect kind of daily issues, so that they are involved in this, so they cannot participate here. Therefore, one of the colleagues, Dr. Jo, left a message to us all. They cannot participate, but they will keep the deadline to submit the paper, they said. And the next paper we like to discuss is Dr. Yoloi's paper from Singapore, but she's also unable to attend this meeting. So I'm very sorry to have this news. And the next one is Anna and Charles paper on EU as a global connectivity leader in an age of geopolitics. That paper may have a very big impact on from this recent event, right? So Charles and Anna, can you have some report on that?
And then we continue. I think what our paper will deal with is exactly how this is seen from, I mean, the recent developments, and for that reason also the developments that are more long in coming. But the shift towards the geopolitical international system that we have seen in the last 10 years, and now it's accelerating, and now we have a very let's say, difficult situation in Europe. And our point of departure here is to say that when we have such a shift in the international system, when there are dominant sort of system occupiers that don't either accept or actually allow the EU to play out its role as a normative power, if you use that kind of old concept by now, but at least to be able to stand up and do what it says it ought to do on the international level, and that is to defend the rules-based international system. If it's not allowed to do that, or if it's sort of there is not space for it to do it, we have the EU will go through a process of changing its policies, because this is externally driven, and because it changes its policies, its external policies, there will be an impact on its self-identification or its self-conception. So that's how we sort of we do a kind of an analysis. At least the first half of the paper is an analysis of that process of role change, but the role change here is very much sort of driven or triggered by a clash of, you know, ideas about how the international cooperation should be managed. And so the idea here is to say that the EU has responded to this, and it has given itself a number of, I mean, now well before the war in Ukraine, it had already given itself a number of instruments with which it could actually meet some of the competition it feels that it has, especially from China. And we mentioned 3 in the paper, but now, you know, given what is happening with the EU as a security provider and its role in the European security context or architecture, I think we can work with this concept even more. So the idea there is that it will have an effect, an impact on how the EU sees itself and what kind of sort of external actor it is and should be. And then the link is made then to EU leadership in the kind of sort of areas where the EU believes it had leadership, at least, and where it probably thinks it could still have some leadership. And leadership now is not to dominate. Leadership is to push sort of global agendas forward. And then we go back to the ideas of different types of leadership and use them to understand how, you know, how actually this idea of changing its self-conception imposed from, you know, external event and external actors will also have an impact on its leadership. So maybe we can also say at the end of the paper that the kind of, let's say, traditional EU leadership is also changing. Maybe the 4 categories we have will not be the kind of categories that we can use entirely to describe how the EU now tries to navigate in this new geopolitical context. So that's, I think that's somewhere, that's you know, quite roughly where we want to end up with this paper. So I give the floor over to Charles.
So thank you, Anna. Good description of what we're trying to do. And I mean, so the way I see it and think the way we see it, I mean, there's some both change, but also some continuity in what the EU is doing. And of course, the change is, as Anna already said, driven a lot by the alterations in the geopolitical environment, and the EU mentions now that there's increasing hostility in this, and this affects what the EU is trying to do in various ways. But I also think if you look at this raft of new initiatives that we've looked at, this Indo-Pacific strategy, the Global Gateway Initiative, the Strategic Compass, even this recent plans for more energy security, you see a lot of continuity in the EU's goals and its agenda setting. So, I mean, they still hold itself up as the defender of the rules-based multilateral international order, defender of democracy, defender of free trade. These are all things you also in these documents often see reference to its environmental goals, its green goals, the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and then you can often see similar sort of priorities in these different documents. So they're kind of on the same page, sort of repeating what their goals are. And then when it comes to their different leadership strategies, well, Anna already kind of covered the role theory, but I mean, you can think of this as you have two audiences for the sort of evolution of its role. And that, of course, is the different partners that make up the EU, but also to other partners in the world that they want to have connectivity with. And I think that's very clear in this Indo-Pacific strategy, where they have the idea of forging lots of partnerships to cooperate on these issues that they've set out on the agenda as being priority areas. And then we kind of see the sort of traditional EU leadership strategy still. You still see a lot of directional leadership, sort of EU holding up stuff. This is what we're doing. Others should do this as well. The instrumental leadership, which I think is very connected to connectivity, where they have a whole bunch of ideas for partnerships and alliances and all these different issues that they prioritize. And what I think is one of the interesting shifts here is we see, I would say, more emphasis on structural leadership, this resource-based leadership. And some of it is a traditional EU structural-based, resource-based leadership, which is, you know, forging trade ties and using its financial instruments, so the trade and aid. And we see in this Indo-Pacific strategy, I'm talking about basically implementing and enforcing the different comprehensive trade agreements they've reached with a variety of partners, and they list all of them in the Asian region: Japan, Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, the various economic partnership agreements. And then they also talk about sort of reviving trade arrangements with others. They also talk about the benefits that partners get from being part of in these agreements, where they reap the rewards of EU tariff preferential treatment. And they talk about the different instruments about that. But I think what's kind of new is this increasing emphasis, both in words and practice, on the hard security. So for example, they really emphasized all these naval exercises they're doing with a variety of partners in the Indo-Pacific region. They talked about the importance of maritime security. These documents also obviously make it clear that the EU realizes that keeping its the navigation for its trade, these important strategic waterways, is emphasized in a way that I haven't seen before. If you go back to the connectivity strategy that sort of originally motivated our project. So I see a real evolution here. And then if you then look at the strategic compass plan, this is also compatible with making the EU more of a security provider. And they very clearly mentioned this new hostile security environment. So I see a lot of convergence in these different strategic documents, and you see a lot of continuity with traditional EU goals and then some traditional EU means. But I think the hard power aspect is being emphasized in a way that certainly was not as prominent in previous iterations of EU, sort of what they were saying, what they were doing. So I see that as an interesting change in its role and the way it's kind of what it's talking about and the way it's portraying itself and the different types of partnerships that it's emphasizing. So it's not just a traditional issue area cooperation, but we actually now see some more security cooperation. And I think that's interesting. So I'll stop there. Thanks. I see Sebastian. Why don't you just go for it?
Yes, okay, I go for it. Well, sure, yes, great. And yet, when we sit together with policymakers in Brussels in June, the question will be in how far a post-24/2 global strategic or European strategic environment allows for the implementation of those plans. Meaning that, yes, it was quite amazing to see that from an EU, when you look at the way how Europe's security role, if there is any, in Asia and the Indo-Pacific, how it is developing, then the Indo-Pacific strategy adds new momentum to that, the security, the maritime security areas and so on. But with the European security becoming a matter of survival, I think that the European need to decide where to put their where to develop their capabilities and where to put them. I mean, do we really? Yeah, I mean, these are bigger implications. However, I think that this is not to be discussed in the paper. I think this is something that we shall and can then develop in the in Brussels. So I think here we have a very practical and very stimulating example of how to make that distinction between Sung-Hoon, as you asked in the very beginning, of what to present and what to bring in the paper. I mean, there can be other papers as well. I mean, you can't put everything in one. So, but I mean, my point is, I mean, this paper clearly shows. I mean, when you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy, I mean, this paper clearly, this topic clearly shows how, again, the term compromised all this thinking has become now with Russia's war of aggression.
Oh, I mean, definitely. And I see this as sort of charting sort of what I see as a shift going on. And I realize that some of this, of course, was written beforehand. But for example, the strategic compass, I mean, that's very clearly makes reference to what's happening in Russia. I also think the energy independence plans, which is to make Europe sort of decouple from Russian energy by 2030, is very much part of this thinking. I also think that regardless if the EU becomes more internal and thinking more about the EU security environment, I think they very much realize that its trade is very important. So this idea of the Malacca Straits and the South China Sea as being a place that they have an interest in, and not just leaving it up to the US. I think that is also interesting that they're very explicit about that already in this Indo-China. And of course, I think it'll be very interesting to see how officials talk about this now, because it's obvious what you see in sort of a document, strategic documents, which is our sort of primary source material. It's always a little bit, there's a lag there. So obviously hearing how people are thinking about this now based on recent events could be potentially very interesting. But I think the EU is also quite vocal about kind of constantly sort of updating its vision on these things. So I imagine that we'll have even more to hear from them to sort of make some adjustments. But I see our role as more sort of conceptualizing the role as the EU expresses it, and then as it's trying to match that with policies. And then if you can make sense of conceptualizing these different strategies according to the different leadership modes, I mean, that I see as a potential contribution to this chapter. But certainly it's a dynamic, I mean, you're always sort of capturing something that's a very moving target. And as we've all discussed, what's going on now is so disruptive. So I mean, and I think that's kind of what the EU is trying to navigate. So how does it see its role, and how does it pursue its goals with its leadership strategy in turbulent times? And obviously, we see so much turbulence in the international system, it makes it really difficult for you to orient yourself. And that's what the EU is struggling to do. And that's what we're trying to sort of capture its attempts to do that, as imperfect as it might be. But thank you for good thoughts.
Anna?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the sort of main takeaway from the paper will not be about the EU's new security role or anything like that. But the main takeaway is really to say, given that all these things are happening, and the way in which the EU has forged its role and its, you know, its international identity, and that we see, as Charles say, we see both continuity and change in its, its concrete policy initiative. What does that then do to the way in which the EU projects itself? It cannot just continue as if nothing has happened, because things have happened externally or are happening, and the EU has changed also. Given that it now has this kind of instruments with which it can protect itself from China's economic coercion, at least, all that is very significant. But it doesn't, you have to sort of, as an actor, you have to, sort of merge that into your idea about yourself and what you should do in the international system, so that it makes sense both to yourself and to others. And there, I think, the policymakers, they're so much up in the thick of things happening. They don't have, the capacity to think, about these things, and they don't see the EU from the outside. We are all insiders, but they are very much insiders. And they were very much wedded to this EU as a normative power concept. And you couldn't, I remember writing an article saying that member states, and this is almost 10 years ago, the member states are actually instrumentalizing the EU's normative actorship. For them, for people in the EAS at the time, that was a very strange thought. So, that kind of things we can actually bring to the table. With lots of, we must be humble, because we are not at the heat of the moment. They have, for them, the situation is very difficult. But that can actually be something we can bring as, as scholars.
Given the very important roles played by United States and NATO in the security fields, do you expect the European Union as a whole, representing the interests of EU member states, will also strengthen its security capacity as a leader of EU member states' security? So what do you expect?
Well, if you look at the strategic compass, it's very clear that they want to increase their Independent Capacity Act, but they also have a whole section on partnership. So once again, the sort of EU, the continuity is that we're not just acting alone, we're doing in partnership with others, and they emphasize NATO as an important partner here. I would also say the security evolution in terms of, once again, is kind of through a connectivity frame in this Indo-Pacific strategy, because they talk about the joint exercises and partnerships with the countries that they're working with, Japan, Pakistan, India, Djibouti. And they also talk about, in addition to sort of keeping navigation, freedom of navigation as something they're protecting, they also talk about fighting piracy and reinforcing EU naval diplomacy. So the diplomacy aspect. So it's through partnership, but also an emphasis that I haven't seen, for example, in the original connectivity strategy. I don't remember seeing anything about like naval exercises and building up maritime capacity and freedom of navigation and the importance of seaways and keeping them free for EU trade. So it's kind of a little more of a hard-hitting interest base, but once again, through partnerships, doing things with others. And I think that's a good way that we see sort of a change of emphasis and also a change of activities, that they're doing all these things with partners. They're not just talking about it, but they're doing things. And then they have plans to do more of these things. So I see this as kind of a, once again, an evolution and then an addition to what they were doing before. But the security aspect, even in this, is much stronger than it was in the original connectivity plan. And once again, lurking behind this is China. I see. So I think that's very interesting if you compare the evolution of the strategic thinking through these documents that the EU is working on and what it's actually doing to implement these things. So.
There was a There was
when
a
it sorry.
No, I interrupted.
No, but I just think when it comes to more traditional security and the relationship between the EU and NATO, I just think it's much less of a problem than it used to be, in the sense that you know, it used to be heresy to say that the EU should have some sort of you know, autonomous security capabilities. But things have changed a lot. I mean, one thing is that Great Britain, the United Kingdom left the EU. So actually, there is not one country that's always sort of boycotting a stronger link between EU and NATO. And the other is that over the years, EU and NATO have built up a very, very strong institutional cooperation in Brussels. And I think as things are going now with the US, I mean, temporarily putting more sort of emphasis on the European security situation because of the war in Ukraine, I think the long-term trend is very clear, is the Asia Pacific. So I can imagine one outcome is actually that, you know, the EU and NATO, when it comes to concrete security abilities and capacities, are the frontier, or the sort of the border there, is going to be much more blurred, and there will be, I mean, the EU and NATO will actually, because in the end, it's the EU member states who are also, which are also members of NATO, they will be able to act on the basis of sometimes the EU, sometimes of NATO, but the practical cooperation will be much less, let's say, complicated than before.
Yeah, that's something that came out very clearly during a conference with Josep Borrell last week, when he was asked about this, and that is the relationship between the EU and NATO. And when he said, well, you know, that debate should be over, relating to what Anna just referred to, right? So whether this is complementary or and so on. And he said, well, the Americans told us, if you want to be stronger, do it. So this is what he how he currently conceives and perceives the strategic environment, right?
So that is because the EU and EU member states feel directly threatened by this war against Ukraine, right? That is.
This is yes. I mean,
it's
you know,
real threat.
We all
Europeans.
don't want to be alarmistic, obviously, but this is, I mean, this is existential. And for instance, me personally, I mean, I deliberately do not use the term World War III because, well, yeah. However, I'm increasingly realizing that this should also be discussed and mentioned when discussing it. You know, I mean, there is a yeah, based on what is ongoing and what is happening. I mean, war in East Asia. You know, I mean, some people do talk about Taiwan all the time. I think to a certain degree, this is alarmistic, but then again, it's not. And so all of this goes into the kind of into this change that we are seeing, that we are observing, that we need to conceptualize and deal with analytically, get rid of any right. Only focus on those variables that we are sure of, but so in Europe it's a real change.
I mean, just a little sort of you know, a little story from our part of the world. I mean, it can well be that Finland decides to ask for membership in 2 months' time, and then the EU will have a tremendous long border to Russia. And then Sweden will probably be, I mean, has no other choice than to follow, I think.
Yeah,
So,
I understand it.
you know, we might find ourselves in this kind of security dilemma, and that was completely unnecessary.
In Korea, we are in the power change now, from more kind of North Korea friendly regime to conservative regime. And we also are, I mean, in a kind of very precarious situation. So, but my impression is that your perception about this situation is more kind of bigger than ours. But our individuals may have a very different opinion. But what about Professor Lee? What do you think about that? Impact on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, certainly it is interrelated, but well, but the impact is not purely direct or the one directional. Certainly, well, North Korea might have learned, at least in the short run, well, the North Korea might have thought that, but they have made a right choice to keep the nuclear weapon, and somehow that, and they are saying, well, the North Korea is different from Ukraine because we have nuclear. So North Korean kind of the government position is gaining credit from its constituencies, from North Korean people and public. So in that sense, their domestic power base may last for a while, but economically in the long run, when international society becomes much more kind of vigilant on this kind of the security threat and ICBMs and other the confrontational agenda, then that could be somewhat more dangerous. Even actually the bigger issue is China. At the beginning of this crisis, China seems to be the winner, kind of with easy kind of pick up from the Ukrainian side. If the Russia made a quasi invasion to Ukraine, and if Ukraine and the Western world have given a proper quid pro quo, like no NATO membership or any kind of recognition on the old version of sphere of influence of Russia, then China could have a lot more leverage in East Asian side, especially on the issue of Taiwan. But when Russia waged an open war and as it brings more negative repercussion from the international society, interesting the phenomena is China is in a sense trying to decouple from Russia and arguing that the China is different from Russia. At least in the short run, Russia would need the Chinese support and China will provide that support. So their relations will be much closer. But financial sanctions from the United States side, the EU side, are not just targeting Russia, but also targeting China in the long run. So China is quite on alert, and especially before their party congress in coming autumn, like late October or early November, China will be very careful not to unnecessarily agitate the Western side or the United States. So, well, Chinese position is just quite in a dilemma once we look at their kind of domestic political choice and situation too. But anyway, well, so I've been listening both the econ side, geopolitical side, and political side of the current Ukraine crisis, somehow, well, we have our first paper, our first paper coming out in Asia Europe Journal, and I guess it is too late to touch those articles, but I think at least we can do two things. First, for monograph draft, we may need, actually Professor Park and I should work more on this one. We need to provide a new context under which our discussion will be located. So certainly use connectivity, the project, and more optimistic prospect for connectivity between the European Union and East Asia and Korea may face a number of different challenges and obstacles. US-China factor is one thing, and Russia factor is one thing. In terms of global supply chain, especially on the Eurasian continent, there will be another challenges. So maybe our book draft may start with the notion that the traditional notion or existing idea on connectivity is changing, and the Eurasian geoeconomics and Eurasian geopolitics are facing another circumstances, and we can somehow, some chapters will be used as planned. Some chapters may need to reflect the changing circumstances. For the June meeting, I think we will be somewhere in between. Certainly some will present the first paper, and I think some of us may want to work on the second output. I think the mixing the Asian Europe Journal and the book draft could be possible, and we can bring one of the more relevant agenda to the meeting. And anyway, it will be open to the public, and the public may want to listen to our reaction and the interpretation on what is going on in the year of 2022. So for the conference, we may have to be a little bit kind of realistic in kind of slightly modifying the version. Well, the presentation is presentation, publication is publication. So I think at least we should do some fan service in Brussels.
That's right. We have to be very strategic in our planning of the conference in June, right? That's right. Thank you. Very good. The two papers, because Polish colleagues are not present, and also Kiev colleagues are not present. I think we have discussed all the papers of present participants.